Hello everybody. So today I have a build for you guys that's a little bit different than the last build I showed you guys. This is a Plague Dragon's Tongue multi-strike physical on-hit crit build. It's incredibly powerful. It's a lot stronger than the last build I showed you guys, the Phalanx build. The Phalanx build was like pretty tanky. This in comparison does insane amounts of damage. It's still decently tanky. As you can see, we have 4,300 health, which on a Forge Guard is definitely unexpected. But this build is a little bit different because we're not using any good primordial items. So you might be wondering, why are we doing that? And primarily it's because I couldn't figure out what to use on this build. You would think that, primordial items are really strong and you always want to use them in your build, but based off of what we're doing, it doesn't make sense. So let me run you through what we're doing, right? So we're using Multistrike. Multistrike is a pretty powerful skill. It's casting pretty often. Multistrike has stacks of armament, which summon additional swords to attack with you. Each stack of armament summons an additional sword, and with aggressive cadence, we're summoning an additional sword at max stacks with a two-handed weapon. So we have up to 4 swords right now. At max stacks, we have 60% more damage, 90% more damage from Guillotine, and 100% more damage from Path of the Night. So a ton of different more damage multipliers across the board, and then we are using Bladestorm to make all of those swords converge on the same target. So we have 4 swords with a bunch of more damage multipliers all hitting the same target. So it's a very powerful skill. The damage is solid. We are using Plague Dragon's Tongue because Plague Dragon's Tongue gives us melee critical strike chance. It also gives us 100 flat melee damage and an additional 100 melee physical damage. So a good amount of flat damage being offered here because there was none offered inside of the skill tree of Multistrike. So we have 200 flat damage over here. It also comes with increased melee attack speed, which is not super common on a spear. So all those things together, it's pretty strong. We have a tier 7 melee attack speed slammed on here. It's a decent roll, 92%. And then ideally you have another tier 7 melee physical damage slammed on here. I didn't go through the effort to farm a double tier 7. So I have a single tier 7 melee increased physical damage, not flat, but still increased physical damage. So it's pretty powerful. Ideally you do have flat physical damage here. So we can't run a primordial item on our spear because this is just too good. Then we have Titan Heart. So you can't run a primordial item on body armor because Titan Heart is giving us 15% damage reduction. It's giving us increased health, increased melee damage. I had a 2 LP. You pretty much want +4 to Multistrike on here and then health. It's the best way to go. You get a ton of health from this. It would be the ideal way to go. So if I had that, I'd probably be around 4,600 health. And I did have a tier 7 multi-strike and tier 6 health, and I missed for a tier 5 necrotic damage. So this is the worst of all worlds, basically, to get this. So basically, you want that. Then from the glove slot, you want Immortal Vice, and if you don't have Immortal Vice, you want Falcon Fist, because you want the melee attack speed. This build needs melee attack speed in order to function, so you can't, there's no alternative. And if anything, you want Ravenous Void as an alternative to be tanky. So there are a bunch of different glove options in this slot that prevent you from wanting to put a primordial item here. Then on your rings, you need Siphon of Anguish because you need the Doom in order to activate Shattered Chain. So those two slots are gone. And then Osarian is an incredibly good slot over here. We don't really have any mana issues. I mean, we do struggle with mana a little bit, but we don't have mana issues to run the blue band ring or to run, I'm forgetting the name of it, but the set ring, we don't need that either because we don't have space for sets in this build. So we can't run anything in our ring slot, and Osarian's a pretty good alternative right here. So a 2 LP Osarian I think is ideal. You want physical damage and either crit chance or strength. So those two would be really good in this slot, but tier 7 physical damage is pretty much what we're running. And then on the boot slot, we could run technically a Solaron Step over here to get melee critical strike chance, or we could run Army of Skin as well for increased melee attack speed and more damage to high health enemies, which would be pretty handy, at least for Uber, which is something that I wanted to do with this build, but turns out Uber's pretty hard. And then I looked at the damage, and it's kind of like a third of what my Rune Master has, so put a park on that. Shattered Worlds. What am I going to run instead of Shattered Worlds, right? If I wasn't going to run Shattered Worlds in my Relic slot, I could run the Primordial Relic Reliquary Nest in order to make my non-unique idols more effective, and this would give me a lot of flat melee damage. And if I had the ideal setup of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, so if I had my 8 set up perfectly and they were all max rolled, I could turn 48 flat melee damage into something like 60 flat melee damage. So 60 flat melee damage is pretty solid, but that would require me to have perfect relics, and I definitely don't have, or sorry, perfect idols, and I definitely don't have that. So Reliquary Nest is kind of a hard ask to run over here, but it is something that could be considered, right? But I'm definitely not going to run it over Shattered Worlds because I like the flat crit chance Shattered Worlds gives, the +1 to all skills, and the increased effect of Frenzy. So all those things are really powerful. And then of course I could roll better with the all attributes, but whatever. Then on my Amulet, this is the place where I was like most considering running something else. So the Amulet slot, I have this incredibly powerful tier 7 crit multi tier 6 physical damage, plus it has health on the suffix and armor shred. So it's an all in all pretty good Amulet. I would want to get at least the crit multi and phys damage, but also the armor shred is kind of missing anywhere else on my build. So I would like to have it in general because armor shred is pretty important for physical builds. Armor affects us more, right? If I didn't run this, what primordial item could I run, right? So from the Amulet slot, I could instead run True Sight Glass if I was able to overcap my crit. So I don't have like super overcap crit right now. I think I'm around like 90 something percent or maybe 100%. But if I could get to 140%, I could utilize True Sight Glass to do a bunch more damage. This seems decent. I do have a couple 2 LP True Sight Glasses running around, so if I could get like crit chance and crit multi on here, it could be valuable. But is it better than what I'm running now? I don't know, because I would lose what I'm running on my helmet, which is a tier 8, so a primordial increased health, and that's giving me a ton of health right now. So I don't really have a good reason to run a primordial item over my health at the moment, at least, because if I remove it, I pretty much lose 1,000 health just from this one item, right? This item is huge for my health, and I still need to get the Titan Heart up to speed in order to make this most optimal. So all of that is to say that I don't have a good spot right now for a primordial item, and that's crazy because this build is actually very strong. So like I mentioned, we're running Multistrike. It's doing a ton of damage. We are then running Shield Throw. So in this slot, I was running Force Strike before, but I'm running Shield Throw for the Colossus buff, which is giving us a bunch of Fizz Pen. So it's giving us at 20 stacks, 20% physical penetration, which is super powerful, and 4 seconds of Frenzy. And we are pretty much applying a ton of Fizz Res Shred with this and Bleed Chance. So in total, we're getting a ton of damage amp just from Shield Throw itself. Then with Shield Throw giving us damage amp, we're also running Abyssal Echoes. So Abyssal Echoes is doing armor shred, of course, but it's also, more importantly, getting an attack speed buff and damage buff to blinded enemies. So 20% more damage and then 20% attack speed buff. So it's very powerful as well. So those two are pretty much being cast at the same time to give myself a huge damage amp. Healing Hands, of course. I was running Volatile Reversal in the slot because Volatile Reversal also could give us Frenzy while we were running it, and it could give us Void Essence, and it could cast Abyssal Echoes for us. So it was doing a bunch of cool things. Unfortunately, I feel like the invulnerability from Healing Hands is a little bit more valuable. Volatile Reversal feels really clunky, so I just don't want to use it. But if you are running Volatile Reversal, you can technically get 9% more damage from Void Essences that you aren't getting from this skill. So that's a different slot. I'm not going to explain Healing Hands. It's the basic setup. And then I'm not going to explain Symbols of Hope. It's also the basic setup. So that's what those two are doing. Okay. I've talked about skills, I've talked about like itemization, I've talked about idols. Let's talk a little bit about passives, right? Because this is kind of important. We are strength maxing. This build is super important to strength max. It's kind of everything that's involved with this build. Strength is giving us crit multiplier with our two-handed weapon from Champion of the Forge. It's also giving us physical penetration per 5 strength with lethal strikes. So strength is everything. And past strength, we want things that give us health, things that give us bleed chance, and things that give us less damage taken. So if it's any of those things, we want it. Which is why in Forge Guard, we're putting 9 points into Weapon Master. We don't need any more physical resistance, so there you go. 1 point into Fresh from the Forge to get to Champion of the Forge, 5 points into that. 2 points into Smelter's Might, 5 points into Guardian. 3 points into Hammer and Anvil for the Armor Shred chance. 6 points into Might. Then 4 points into Duelist so that we can get to Lethal Strikes, which we put an additional 4 points in. Then 1 point in Flawless Defender, 1 point in Walls of Solarum, 3 points in Infinite Bulwark, and then 5 points into Liquid Iron for the less damage over time taken. This doubles when we pop a potion, which we will be doing with relative frequency because we have Cleanse on our potions. Then we want 25 points into Void Knight because we are taking Void Corruption, which gives us 1 point crit multi per point spent in Void Knight. So we're getting 25% 25% crit multi from our points in Void Knight, alongside an additional 10% increased health from Dark Maw. And we're going 15 points into Paladin. That's 8 points in Conviction for the increased physical damage and 16% physical pen. And then 7 points into Valor for the health and endurance. We don't have any points into Defiance because our elemental resistance is already capped, so we don't need help with it. Okay, so that's our passives. I have 1 level to go, and I think I'll put that point into Master of Arms for the +2 to strength. Otherwise, what are we doing with this build, right? There's a lot of good items I would like to run over this amulet. This amulet gives me health, and that's awesome, but otherwise the 2 affixes, the crit multi and physical damage, I think could be better served on something like a Nihilus. Because Nihilus could give me more health, which is valuable. It could round out my resistances. I'm not fully capped, and it could give me more armor. And +2 to all skills means that I can take 1 more point into Alpha Cuts for capping my crit multi, which would be valuable. And then I can put extra points into Blitz, which gives me additional physical penetration. So those are always valuable. But if I'm not putting points over there, that does mean that I could also go for something else, right? From the amulet slot, right? Because there are a bunch of different options. Things like Blossom of the Immortal Stone are also valuable, right? Because it gives me a ton of increased armor mitigation applying to damage over time. And then it's converting the void, necrotic, and poison damage into physical damage to make me incredibly tanky because my armor applies purely to those types of damage. And it gives me a ton of endurance. So it can make me incredibly tanky, which could be valuable. But that's not the only place it could be valuable, right? There are other alternatives. I've already mentioned True Sight Glass. If I could overcap my crit, this would be worth it. But what I have not talked about and what I think could be mega valuable is Apostate Sanctuary, right? Which can give me 14% more damage, and it'll only essentially ding me for casting a spell, which would be my Abyssal Echoes. So if I could pick up Apostate Sanctuary, I'd probably go back into Volatile Reversal and then use Volatile Reversal to cast my Abyssal Echo, so I'd never have to cast a spell, and I would always have my leech up. So there are a bunch of good amulet options available. And in the helmet slot, there are also some options available. Remember, our helmet right now is our tier 8 increased health. We could just drop this back down to a tier 7 and we'd be pretty good. We'd lose probably like 200 health, but that would be it, right? This exact helmet could be very solid. If I didn't want to run this helmet and I wanted to run a, what is it called? A different helmet to make me tankier somehow, I would go for becoming tankier to damage over time. I think that's the biggest threat to this build, which is damage over time. And so anything that can buff my armor and damage over time is very welcome. And something that does that is Decayed Skull, right? Decayed Skull is a legendary, or sorry, it's a unique helmet that gives me 20% void and necrotic damage taken as physical damage. So similar to the Primordial Amulet we were talking about. It also can give 100 flat armor, which is decent, and 10% more armor, which is multiplicative, and then up to 30% armor mitigation applying to damage over time. And this is a helmet that we can easily farm at 3 LPs. So what does that mean for us, right? We get a 3 LP Decayed Skull, we slam on like health, let's say. Health, strength, health, you know, something that gives me increased melee damage. And then we are in a position where we potentially have more armor, similar amounts of health, and more armor applying to damage over time, which means that we are tankier to damage over time. So that's another good alternative for this build. I do have one with health vitality. It's not ideal, so I would definitely farm up like a 3 LP Decayed Skull before going for anything like that, and a pretty well rolled one, right? But there are good options for this build. There's definitely also a version that runs the two-handed node, Forge Master's Might, and then you can run a shield on your offhand in order to get even tankier. That could be good if you're struggling against Uber. I think this build can do Uber, but like my damage just isn't quite there because I don't have my correct 2 LP Plague Dragon's Tongue. So yeah, would strongly recommend those changes if you want to go for Uber. I think I'm going to call it with this build. It's super fun to optimize, but there are some things that are grinding my gears for sure. So see y'all later. Peace.